talking in terms of crossovers from white voters, helping minority voters to be able to elect candidates of their choice. The one thing that the court did not, really has not ruled on is whether or not two minority groups coming together to build a majority will actually have protection under the Voting Rights Act. It hasn't been a decision, it hasn't been before the court. We're believing that it is certainly a possibility, and so that is why we're talking about how building these districts. The other thing I'd just like to add in Bartlett is that while the court did not say that did say that you will not secure or have Section 2 protection or voting rights protection, it does not prevent districts from drawing districts with crossover voters and where there is a huge influence and African Americans or Latinos or any groups of color being able to elect representatives of choice. And so I think that background is really important as we start to talk about forming a majority of the district. So.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like Bartlett needs a modernization for the 21st century and sort of what's happening in our state today. And that is, there are places like Sacramento, and this is something that we as a group have had an opportunity to take a look at, and what are the numbers there, and looking at the 25, 25, 25, there is no clear majority among the groups. And so for a group like Greenlining, we're looking at that and we're saying, that's a great experiment, a great model for the direction we may be going as a state, where districts can be drawn in that way, where there happens to be no clear majority of a particular group, where we can begin to make sure that there is a candidate who can be elected from there who appeals to all of those groups. Not necessarily one, or doesn't have to be a particular race of a particular or ethnicity of a particular group within that region. The other thing I wanted to point out is that Greenlining will be focused on helping communities evaluate maps. So I know that Maldeth talked about putting together maps as well as APAL. Our role won't necessarily be in drawing maps themselves, but helping communities really take a look at those maps and evaluate and understand, are the conditions given sort of the demographics and the shape of this district, who you're aligned with, what some of their goals might be, their needs, their concerns, are they in line with yours? And again, we're doing that to ensure that there's sort of a multiple lens that you're looking at when you're trying to determine if a district is one that represents you. As far as particular areas where we anticipate that there may be some conflict, I mean, we're definitely looking at South Los Angeles as an area. It's a growing Latino population there, but represented almost exclusively in many ways by African American leadership. And so this is something that we anticipate will be up for discussion this time around as the redistricting or the lines are redrawn accordingly. And then we're also looking at the Inland Empire, and that may be a place where there may not be a clear majority district that can be drawn, but there may be some opportunities for these collaborative districts. And we'd like to see more research in the area to really try and understand. We looked at a map recently of the state, and there were districts where you could see just about a majority of people of color. Lots, small. If you looked at a pie and people of color sort of sliced off almost a majority, if not in some cases a majority of those districts. But they haven't been able to elect a candidate who is a person of color at all. And so our focus has been to ensure that, again, people understand what things they have in common to ensure we have legislation that supports whatever those interests are.
I just want to add one minor, not necessarily minor point, but one additional point to what Tanua said about South Los Angeles. In the past, South Los Angeles has historically been African American, but over the last several decades, you've seen an increasing Latino population. However, that Latino population has tended to be non-citizen, and therefore you could create a district in South LA that had even like 30 to 35% African American population and still have an effective control or effectively influence the outcome of the election, because most of the population that was Latino was not a voting population. So that's an issue that we confront in the redistricting process in California when we're coming across large immigrant non-citizen population.
Thank you. The next question really deals with handling competing minority interests in the redistricting in the past. And California really has been a model, at least in one instance, in the 49th district. And I'd like to start with Nancy to talk about how have competing minority interests been handled in redistricting in the past?
Sure. Well, in 1991, which was the first time that MALDEF got involved in the redistricting process by submitting maps, MALDEF was working closely with, there was a number of Asian coalitions. There were 2 Asian coalitions that had formed, one in Northern California and one in Southern California. And the Asian coalitions had identified one area of priority in the redistricting process, which was 4 cities in the San Gabriel Valley. They wanted to keep intact because they had a growing Asian American population. And those 4 cities are Monterey Park, Alhambra, Rosemead, and San Gabriel. And during the redistricting process, you know, it was a long process in terms of having the groups sit down and talk to each other and develop trust. And I wasn't present for the statewide redistricting at that time, but I've talked to people who were involved in that process, and they said that, you know, they met with leadership like Stuart Quo from APAL, as well as leadership from MALDEF, plus a number of community members in the Latino and Asian American communities that were interested in being involved in the redistricting process. They had at least 20 meetings to dialogue and talk about priorities, but before they could even get to what the priorities were, at least 10 of those meetings were just to get to know each other, to develop trust, kind of feel each other out before they were able to get to some substantive discussions about, you know, how to preserve, you know, what they wanted. And in particular, what ended up happening was that there was a negotiation and a deal was made where the Latinos and Asian Americans agreed that they would maintain intact those 4 cities in the San Gabriel Valley as a area that had potential growth to, you know, it was already growing more and more Asian American. And in the end, they ended up endorsing the same maps that included that area within an assembly district. So it was an influence district within a Latino majority district. And in the 2001 redistricting, that agreement was maintained to continue to keep those cities intact. And in fact, it went, the Asian American population in those 4 cities increased by more than 10%. I think it went up to 52% in 2001. To continue to see that district evolve into potentially an Asian American majority district. And there were some decisions that had to be made about, you know, if you keep those 4 cities together, where are you going to pull the rest of the population? They could have gone more toward, I guess, the northeast. That was a more conservative Asian American population and Anglo population, or they could have grabbed population going south and east into the East LA area, grabbing other Asian population that tended to be more democratic and Latino population that tended to be more democratic. And they ended up going south and east and creating this sort of Latino and Asian district. And as a result, in 2000, Judy Chu was elected to that assembly district. But in the process, there was a lot of meetings, a lot of collaboration. In 2001 was the first time that you had the 3 minority groups signing off onto the same assembly maps that were submitted. We had African American redistricting coalition, Asian American groups, and the Latino groups endorsing the same assembly map after they had had a series of discussions and meetings. So that's just one example of, you know, what happened in San Gabriel Valley. I don't know what the population is going to show once the census data comes out for that area, but, you know, Judy Chu is no longer in the assembly. She was elected to Congress from, I believe it's still a majority Latino congressional district.
You know, we weren't around in 1991 and 2001, so I definitely rely on Nancy. But what I will say is that, looking at hindsight, certainly negotiation has been part of it. And I think that this year, you know, 2011, we are probably in a better position than we have been in decades past because we have so many people who are aware and active around this issue. We've got not just the leading organizations, but doing all the grassroots work